In come the lawyers. So let's talk about the legal ramifications of these kinds of issues. And Stephen Malure, it doesn't have to have sinister intent. Things get overlooked, but that creates legal problems. So what's your first advice at this point from the legal standpoint?
Well, first is always to, before you engage in the sale process as seller, make sure you have your house in order and make sure your IT systems are great and that you are comfortable that you have appropriate cybersecurity. Because the bottom line is, you're right, you may say that I've never had an issue, I'm not worried about it. But I can tell you that in the buy-sell agreement, the allocation of risk, if there's a problem with cybersecurity, is going to fall on the seller. The buyer is going to say, if there's a problem with your systems, that's, I'm assuming that I'm paying this purchase price on the basis that you have good systems, right? So they'll do their diligence, but also as a legal matter, contractual matter, they'll say, if there's an issue, I want you to be on the hook for it. And that will end up in a negotiation, but certainly that's the buyer's first stab at it. That's purely a seller's risk.
Sean, in the Studebaker collector's world, the Avanti automobile is very popular. An Avanti with an R2 engine is very valuable. Lots of people sell Avanti saying they have an R2 engine, but it's not an original. It's a simple mistake that gets made, and it's not with harmful intent, but it happens all the time. When you're at the table, how often do you see the simple mistake become the big issue?
It happens every now and then, but typically what I'd like to do when I start off working with a family business is meet their team. And obviously as part of that team is the attorney. And if I don't find that they are up to the task, that their firm doesn't have all the capabilities needed from beginning to end, and even going forward with the new organization, I often make the referral, like we need a new legal team, because if I don't say that, the situation that you described is pretty likely to happen.
John, part of the things that a firm like yours and like Sean's look at are the employment agreements that are already in place. How crucial is that as part of your due diligence when you're acquiring a firm, John?
Oh, I mean, it's super important. The, as we've kind of mentioned, I think just throughout the entire panel, businesses are kind of these living and breathing things, right? And it's a collection of people that help them operate effectively. And, you've got to make sure that that key human capital is in place, because if you buy the business and then you have, key people walk out the door, you're not going to be getting what you paid for. So I think it's incredibly important to make sure that that you've got the right people on board to come over and help you integrate the business and then help you operate it over the long run.
Steve Weinberger, you've been part of that key human capital. Did you ever have a non-compete, and did you ever try to get out of one?
Yes and yes. Yeah, I mean, it's depending on the situation. At this level, you usually do have a non-compete, and the issue is for how long and the breadth of sort of companies that you're precluded from competing with. So it can be tough, and that's where they get the lawyers involved. But it can be tough, and so yeah, I've had both. It's not fun. But back on the sort of retaining employees, I got two words: retention bonuses. I mean, we all use a lot of those retention bonuses. They are incredibly important. There are key players that don't want to be part of the deal for whatever reasons. And if you need them for the first 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever, you're going to have to sort of pony up to keep them there. And that's a big part of the deal costs, I think, probably as you guys have seen in the last several years.
Stephen Malure, retention bonuses, golden handcuffs, perhaps, are they perhaps better than the contract, the no-compete, the ancillary documents that might tie an employee to a company?
Well, I'll tell you right now, what will drive the amount of the retention bonus is whether the employee has an existing non-compete. Because think of the difference in leverage. If I, as a key salesperson, says, I don't want to go to the buyer, but I have an existing non-compete, I lose a lot of leverage, because that means I can't go out and say, I'm leaving the company, but I can't engage in my business, right? So then I'm kind of locked in. All right, I'll go with the buyer and I'll get a non-compete and I'll get a retention bonus. But if that employee doesn't have a non-compete, there's a lot of leverage to say, hey, you got to pay me to sign on to a non-compete, which the buyer will certainly want. So retention bonuses are key. They really are. The key item is to understand who are those key employees, how many, and getting them to buy into the transaction. And that's going to require typically, retention bonuses.
Also rollover equity, Sean O'Dowd. How important is rollover equity for the seller as you're putting these deals together?
Oh no, it's key. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, people, you have to incentivize people properly so everyone's on the same page and has the same goals. But one other aspect that I think is really important is transparency. What will be their role in the new entity? What will be their responsibilities? And in addition to the rollover equity, what is their full compensation package going to look like?
We talked last seminar about the seller who doesn't want to give up the control. Does rollover equity buy the control for the PE firm?
I think it definitely helps align incentives. That's what I would say. I think when you have a seller, and especially in a family-owned business, right? You have the seller who's owned and operated the business over a number of years, maybe a number of decades, so they know the business a lot better than any buyer is going to be able to uncover during diligence. So I think just aligning incentives and kind of accounting for those information asymmetries is really important. And just making sure that everyone is rowing the boat in the same direction. I think that's key in order to accomplish the overarching goal for everybody. So I couldn't agree more with what Sean said about just being transparent and just making sure everyone's on the same page and just doing good business.
Russ, how would you advise a friend who might be selling their business to private equity on this issue of rollover equity? What key points would you advise them?
Obviously, having your eyes wide open to the transaction would probably be the first thing I would say, because we talked about a number of things, as part of this. And to me, when you start thinking about alignment, transparency, and kind of looking forward, are you making sure that you are properly aligned with the plan going forward? And I think that is not always clear and concise as it relates to transactions. And to me, as Steve made the comment earlier about having leverage in terms of making sure that you have the right leverage. As a friend who's moving in this direction, to me, it's understanding what their leverage point is and how ultimately they're going to be able to use that leverage moving forward to obviously make sure everything works well for them, but also in the combined entity as well.
Stephen, for a seller, the tax consequences, not only from selling, but from rollover equity, how big a consideration is that as they're going forward?
It's significant because the rollover is tax deferred. So it is a way to invest effectively proceeds from the sale into another investment, right? So that's what makes it very attractive. For someone who is selling a business at a very high price, it's effectively part of their portfolio now. I've got, this 10 or 20% that I invested into this fund that now owns this company. And I understand that, and that's a good investment. I did it on a tax deferred basis. So that's really compelling.
Sean, do the tax consequences of the sale ever stop a deal?
No, because typically you've done sort of the analysis beforehand and everyone kind of has an understanding of what it's all about. Only in a situation where there hasn't been the appropriate advisors.
Steve Weinberger, I hope I'm not revealing too much information. You're a dual citizen, Canadian, US. What about cross-border situations? The taxes here are different than the taxes in Canada. Does that pose a problem, whether it be rollover equity or the actual sale going forward?
It could. You're taxed based on your residency, right? So regardless of citizenship status, where your residence, where you will pay taxes. Look, one other point I want to make on rollover equity. It's a big conversation. You're asking somebody, you're going to buy my company, and you're asking me to give you a bunch of money to invest in your company that's buying us. So again, it's a big deal, and you should do a lot of due diligence on, I think Russ mentioned transparency. You've got to do a lot of due diligence on the company you're investing in, like you would on any other company. you know, I've been doing this long enough. I can have another real life experience. You know, a company was looking to buy us some years ago. The CEO and myself, they wanted to keep us on, roll over a chunk of equity. And we spent a lot of time evaluating the strategic plan of the buyer. And quite frankly, we said, you know what, they're not gonna hit those numbers. So no, we don't want to play. So again, you've got to do a lot of work just to make sure you're taking your own money and giving it to somebody else.
Well, want to thank everybody for joining us today. Sean O'Dowd, Jim Sharp, John Butler, Russ Saperstein, Stephen Malore, and Steve Weinberger.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks a million, and good luck with the rest of your day. Thanks for being with us. That's a great job.